do I have the right tech stack? Do I have the right processes to systemize growth? Then do I have the right people? And then am I enabling them? It's very easy to list them off one by one in order now, but each one of those components we have to think about getting right.
Ross Keating, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Let's just start with the business, the Lennox Academy. What is it? Kind of how big you are, who the customers are, what you do, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So the Lennox Academy is a sales training academy for go-to-market teams. So that means that we train AEs, AMs, SDRs, BDRs, and more recently sales leaders as well. And we enable them on sales best practices. So we are a sales training business, been running for about 2.5 years now. Thankfully, we've had a great 2.5 years. We've been able to work with lots of the top tech companies, obviously a lot of them based here. So, a lot of work with companies like LinkedIn, Gong, Salesforce, HubSpot, DocuSign, Reps, as well as with lots of the great startups in Ireland as well.
Talk to me just a little bit about, so you mentioned there AE, BDR, SDR. Talk to me just a little bit about the structure of a sales team from the side of, I suppose, there's probably startups that start and don't understand this go-to-market structure and what the best way to do it is. If you could just talk me a little bit about what those terms mean, for example, and then what the kind of good structure looks like for these types of companies.
Yeah, sure. So an SDR, sales development rep, is typically your entry-level role, generally deals with inbound sales inquiries. Then you'll have a BDR, again, typically entry-level or one up from entry-level, that manages outbound. After that, you get promoted into an account executive role, so full sales cycle role. And then you have account managers, relationship managers that will manage existing customers, both for retention and for growth. And I think that decision on how you go to market as a startup and who those first hires are is often one of the most interesting conversations that I have with founders, and often one of the hardest conversations to get right as well.
How do you mean?
So, I suppose with a lot of the content that I post online, I'm in the luxurious position of getting to talk to lots of founders in Ireland, right? So you hear a lot about what's working, what's not working, questions they have, mistakes that they make. And there's a real set of decisions that you have to make, particularly as you go on that journey from 0 to 1, right? One of those is who or what role is your first sales hire? And I think there's a lot of first-time founders out there that think about hiring 1A from a big tech company and assuming that the sales rep then knows how to go and, build a sales cycle around a very new product. And a lot of times that's just not the case, right? There's a kind of a founder sales model that's very different from a seller. So, a lot of founders will sell on vision and maybe a little bit of charisma, on market industry knowledge. And then you have a sales rep that comes in and needs the infrastructure or needs the go-to-market processes that they've had in previous large organizations. And that can be a real challenge, right? So there are some basic guardrails that you can put in place around that. So if you can, don't hire one sales rep, hire two, right? There's a lot of benefit in having one sales rep learn from the other. You also create a little bit of competition. You start to develop a little bit of institutional knowledge within the business, and you remove single points of failure, right? Now, similarly, there's a lot of founders out there that will say, hey, I can't afford to hire two. And again, that's totally understandable. I think what I'd say to you there is, for as long as, or the point where you think you need to hire a rep and that kind of founder-led sales phase is over, it's probably not, right? Really, that 0 to 1 cycle is where the founder is really supposed to carry most of the revenue growth, and it's at that point there's a kind of a, we often talk about the cutting of the founder umbilical cord, and that is a whole process in itself to really kind of build out your go-to-market structure and to have the right processes in place, so that you're well set up to bring in to bring the right level of talent.
When you say 0 to 1, do you mean conceptually or 0 to 1 million in ARR?
0 to 1 million ARR.
So let's say there's someone on that journey and they want to hire a salesperson, they want to get help there. Where is usually the best fit? Is it usually bringing on an account exec or kind of a BDR type role? What's usually the best kind of first step in that process?
I think the answer to that has changed over the last couple of years. So obviously in the last couple of years, we're selling into very different markets, right? So we're selling into markets with more complex sales cycles. We're selling into markets where win rates and average contract values are under pressure. So that means that you need a sales rep who can handle those dynamics. So for me, the answer to that is now hire a more senior profile of person who has worked in a scrappy environment before, right? Who has worked in a startup environment and is used to dealing with chaos and a lack of structure and is excited by that and doesn't drown in it.
Yeah, I think, bringing people in that have only, I suppose, worked in a corporate environment where everything is set up, it's very, very different. Like even from when I moved from more kind of larger corporate companies into smaller accounting firms, it's like, does anyone have a mouse for Conor? It's like the structures, even the smallest things just, weren't there anymore. So it's a very, very different environment to come into. Does it matter whether the person comes from directly from a corporate environment or directly from a scrappy environment? Can they have kind of worked in a startup before, then into corporate and then back? Is it just that they've had the experience in the past?
No, I mean, look, there's always more than experience that you look for, right? You look for the capabilities and profile of the person and the aptitude for learning and the attitude and all of that good stuff. But I think if you haven't worked in an early stage business before, it's a pretty rude awakening to understand what it really looks like behind the scenes.
Tell me about you then. So when did you kind of start your career and how did you end up founding the Lennox Academy?
So my first sales job was a door-to-door sales job. So selling fresh fruit and delivery. It was a commission-only job. I quickly followed that with another door-to-door sales job selling a fresh dairy delivery. And that was a real baptism of fire into what a sales job actually looks like, right? So from both buyer and seller, in terms of psychology of both, on the buyer side, you learn very quickly you try and learn very quickly how to build rapport with somebody as you knock on the door. So you got 5 or 6 seconds, right? So you start to develop maybe a mindset and skills around what does that look like? How do I prepare for that conversation? And then on the seller side, I think, although I didn't know it at the time, that was a good introduction into the concept of volume, firstly. So you could knock on 100 sales or knock on 100 doors in the rain, make 0 sales. And you could come back the next day, do the exact same thing and leave with 6 sales and a wad of cash in your pocket, right? So that kind of uncertainty and resilience was definitely something that I learned. And then I think the idea of kind of distribution as well, right? So like, how do I maximize my impact here? How do I create leverage in thinking about how I go to market? I mean, I'm using this terminology now. I certainly wasn't thinking like that at the time, right? But it was, how do I get the biggest bang for my buck in terms of my effort here? And that was definitely a big learning. I left college then and I went straight into LinkedIn. So I spent 2 years in LinkedIn doing the SDR role and then an account executive role. And that was really all about learning sales craft, right? So that was, how do I run a sales process? How do I do great discovery? How do I position my solution? How do I negotiate? I was selling the LinkedIn Sales Solutions product, which is Sales Navigator, which is a staple in every tech organization's tech stack now, but at the time, was new to the market and was a very exciting place to be. So I did 2 years there. I think that was also a lesson in what a best-in-class organization looks like in terms of infrastructure. So org design, tech, different relationships across different stakeholders internally. But I quickly realized that I wanted to be in a startup. And that was a bunch of things. Some of it was just being a small cog in a very large wheel. But I think a lot of it was trying to get to the coalface of how and why the organization was or wasn't scaling. So I left LinkedIn in December 2016 and joined a business called ChannelSight. I joined ChannelSight in January 2017 at probably quite an interesting time because they'd just done a funding round. They were in and around about that 1 million ARR mark, and they were building plans to really try and scale that business. So they hired a sales team. I was sales rep number 2 that had just come into the business, and I spent 5 very happy years there. I did a year as an account exec, did a team lead role. I did a couple of years as their sales director, and I did 2 years as their chief revenue officer. So that was where I think I really grew up professionally. It was also probably the place that I learned that selling wasn't my passion, which sounds like an interesting thing or a strange thing to say for somebody who runs a sales training business. But I learned very quickly that scaling a business and understanding really, how an organization goes to market was something that I was passionate about. And I think when I look back on my time there, that has probably shaped a lot of how I think about our go-to-market activities within Lennox, right? So things like frameworks and thinking in frameworks, right? That was really something that I was introduced to within ChannelSight. And that could be, sales frameworks like MedPick or go-to-market frameworks. I'll tell you a little bit about how we think about that within Lennox later. But also I think in how to communicate with senior executive stakeholders, right? I was 26 the first time I walked into the ChannelSight boardroom to talk about why we didn't hit our numbers and what we were going to do to course correct. And in that room were some very senior VCs, were some, very recognizable CEOs who had built and exited business. And in hindsight, I was a rabbit in headlights, trying to get through those conversations. But that was a real leveler in terms of, needing to or acquiring the skills and the experience that I was going to need. And we had probably 4 quarters when I took over that business or running that business where we weren't hitting our numbers, right? And I distinctly remember one of the founders sending me a note saying, hey, it's make or break time here. We're under pressure. And thankfully that was the quarter where things clicked and we had 7 or 8 quarters of very consistent and predictable growth before I left ChannelSight. But, those 4 quarters looking back are really a blink on the horizon. But actually there was 4 quarters there where I was really under pressure and really working hard and really in the depths of what go-to-market looks like as I tried to figure out that business. It was also the point where we were moving from an economy where startups needed or I suppose the modus operandi was growth at all costs. And as COVID hit, we flipped into how do you build much more capital efficient go-to-markets. So that was a really interesting transition as well. And
I don't know how much you can talk about ChannelSight given that you're not there anymore, but what was it that kind of clicked? Was there one thing or a couple of things? Like what did you kind of have to learn in order for that to start moving in the right direction?
Yeah, well, firstly, I can't take credit, solely by any means for the growth that we had over those periods of time. There was, lots of really great activities and things that were happening in other functions. But I think on the go-to-market side, there was a number of things that happened. Firstly, you've really kind of figure out who your buyer is and what the messaging is that really lands with that buyer. You start to figure out the data model that sits underneath it, right? So, that is your unit economics, but it's also all of your funnel metrics, and therefore what routes to market you need to invest in. So that probably took me longer than it should, given the inexperience that I had, right? That's your maybe strategic piece. And then there's an execution element as well, which is, do I have the right tech stack? Do I have the right processes to systemize growth? Have I designed the right org? So we talked a little bit about SDRs, BDRs, AEs. So we went through a few different iterations of the org design. Then do I have the right people? And then am I enabling them, right? So all of those things, it's very easy to list them off one by one in order now, but each one of those components we had to think about getting right. And, they're the components that I still think about in terms of scaling Lennox now, but it was kind of learning on the job back then.
Yeah, it's interesting actually as you're talking, and we were talking a little bit beforehand about what you kind of do with Lennox now. And if you don't mind, just to jump ahead a little bit to this point, is that currently, I suppose you're not almost you're teaching that stuff with Lennox, right? That's I suppose you're training people on these processes, but it's not. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. It's not the way you've actually grown the business, and which is odd, because I suppose that say to a man with a hammer everything is a nail. You haven't used the same hammer essentially to grow your sales. Can you just talk to me a little bit about that? Why you've done it differently, and how that kind of came about?
Yeah, I'd love to tell you there was a big grand vision when I started Lennox. The reality is that, so after I left ChannelSight, I did a year in a company called eDesk, and I wanted post that role to figure out what I was going to do on my own. And it was as strategic in thinking as it sounds. And I went out to market and I started doing some sales training workshops. I started doing some fractional gigs. So I took on 2 or 3 fractional, chief revenue officer roles where I worked in businesses and helped them to scale. And what caught fire and started to generate a tailwind behind it was the sales training piece, right? And some of that I think was market dynamics at the time. You had organizations that were really in the middle of layoffs, and you had reps selling into those tougher market conditions that we've mentioned, businesses trying to do more with less. And so there was a real hunger in the market for sales training. The other thing that we figured out pretty quickly is that there are lots of great sales training businesses in the UK and the US, and there are a select few here, but it's not as competitive in Ireland for really great sales training as it is internationally. So that was the start of my journey with Lennox, was let's run sales training workshops. And the first one that I started, I bullied my brother into coming. I somehow managed to flog it to 4 other people for 400 quid a head for a 2-day workshop. And thankfully in the first session there was a Salesforce rep there. In the second session there was another Salesforce rep there, and in the third session there was 12 Salesforce reps.
Wow.
At it, right? And we trained maybe 100 reps in those first 9 months.
Were you holding them somewhere, like in your office, for example, or where were you holding?
Well, I didn't have an office at the time, so my pal Johnny, who runs a company called Learn Signal, I was hijacking their offices and running them out of there for the first couple. Then we took an office on Bagot Street, and we started running them there. But I think that was kind of the first sign that, okay, there's a business here. That initial version of the business was very different to what I was used to, right? So it was a B2C model, selling an in-person product. It was an alien kind of go-to-market to me. So you were selling, when you say B2C, so the reps that were there from Salesforce, for example, you were selling kind of directly to the people rather than to Salesforce itself as a company. Yeah, we were selling to BDRs, to AE, some of whom were funding it themselves, some of whom were funding it through education benefits that they have. But it was pretty clear that we weren't going to scale a business that way. So in September or October of that year, we decided to move the business online. We went and found an LMS, the wrong LMS, which we've since transitioned away from. Again, another easy...
LMS is a learning
management system on which we host our training content, yeah. But we moved our business online, and we went through another very painful 6 months of having very few people turn up to our training. And we iterated on that over a long, over a period of time. Started to build out the team. So, we're now a team of 4. We've added 1 person as we've kind of achieved different growth milestones. But we've moved the business online, and, we're still selling B2C. So again realized that we needed to move the business to a B2B model. And since then, over the last year and a half or year and 9 months, our go-to-market has been about how do we scale enterprise grade B2B online, live, and in-person learning. And in true startup fashion, we've had months where we've been pulling our hair out and it hasn't been working, and then in the last couple of months, in particular, things have really popped, right? So it's been an interesting and exciting and chaotic and tough journey to date.
Can I ask about why live? So
Yeah,
I mean, it's probably easier when you just think about it from an outsider perspective. It's easier just to have everything recorded and to have it there. Why have you chosen to do live?
So the number one thing that any good training provider thinks about is, how do I drive action after the training? How do I create adoption of the sales training best practices that I have just taught my learners? So we have thought about a number of different mechanisms for that. One of them is that we believe that live learning allows the person in the room to engage with the facilitator and better understand the material that they're learning. It also drives higher retention within the session, right? So that is one element. We do have on-demand content as well, and there are people who like learning async, and that's great too. Similarly, it's the reason that we've built what we call a blended learning model. So blended learning model simply means that you introduce the concepts in an on-demand format. The learner learns in a live session. They take away an assignment to adopt the practices during the week, and then we integrate the manager into the coaching during the week via a manager resource to really kind of drive adoption of those behaviors. So it's all about kind of thinking around, what can we do to ensure that the person leaving the session takes positive action relative to their sales behavior. We are launching another business in the next couple of months, business called OverPath, which is an AI performance agent. I'll tell you a bit about later. But again, the same idea is there, is how do we get to the rep at the point of execution and reinforce the learning so that it positively impacts what they're going to do next.
As you were talking, you said, and since then, over the last year and 9 months, and it struck me again just how kind of short a journey this has been and how early you are in the business and how high the growth has been. So you're very transparent on LinkedIn about your kind of monthly revenue numbers and everything. It's very interesting to follow along with. But could you maybe just bring me through the growth? What has that looked like? Was it the switch directly from B2C to B2B that kind of initiated obviously bigger ticket items? Or what would you kind of contribute that to over such a short amount of time?
Well, again, I suppose going back to that go-to-market framework has been a number of things, right? And maybe I can tell you a little bit about how we've thought about building the model and the go-to-market and then the product in that order. But before I do that, I think it's also important to note that, we are a bootstrapped services business, and we have therefore built a very lean operation. And in some ways, that's actually played into our hands in terms of growth, right? So what I mean by that is we don't have any engineering costs. We don't have any marketing costs. Our costs are, salaries and other basic running costs. That lends itself to a couple of things. One, every decision that you make in terms of your next commercial activity has to be a very careful and well thought out one. It also means that the activities that you engage in, which are organic, which are designed to create organic reach, have to be consistent and have to be process driven because you rely on them. So that has meant that I think we have put in a lot of reps into what is working for us that we might not have done if we had more capital in the business, because we would have been testing and experimenting elsewhere. So, that is not to say that raising money isn't the right thing to do for lots of businesses. But for us, being a services business where we could scale lean, it has really played into our hands in terms of growth as well. I think one of the mistakes, again, that first-time founders make that I see regularly is, I'll build a great product and my customers will come. And one of the things that I was taught was, build distribution first and build product second, and that has been very real for us. I'd go a step further to say that you build a model first, you build distribution second, and you build product third. Again, I often meet founders who, have built a good product, have then tried to figure out how to get customers, and customers arrive, and then they go, oh, our margins are too low and we actually can't scale this, right? So again, that is the product of building a lean service business. We've had to develop frameworks around this stuff. So we now have a model, for example, or we have a framework for thinking about the model behind every commercial activity. Every new product that we launch has to meet certain criteria. We call it the RAG 80 model. So R stands for repeatable. It has to be operationally repeatable. If we bring it to market once, we have to be able to bring it to market a second time, a third time in a very repeatable way. The A is, do we have the advantage, right? So are we positioned to win? Do we have the market opportunity? Do we have the IP? Do we have the expertise where we are positioned to win? The G is, can we sell it through our existing GTM channels? So if we can sell it through our existing GTM channels, we know the TAM is big enough. We know that we're not going to suddenly inflate our cost or our CAC. And then the 80 stands for 80% gross margin, right? So every commercial initiative that we bring to market has to either immediately achieve an 80% gross margin, or it has to you have to be able to show a plan where you will be able to get it to 80% gross margin. And that has given us discipline, right? Because when you run a startup, your customers have ideas, your vendors have ideas, your team have ideas, you have ideas. So ideas are not the problem. It's about choosing the right idea and being really disciplined with it. So that model around how we choose those initiatives has been really beneficial. We then think about our GTM. So that's the framework that I ran through very quickly earlier. It's, our messaging, our market, and then we move towards, building the right data model around it. So that's unit economics, revenue model, financial model, funnel metrics. We move towards our routes to market. So again, LinkedIn is our route, our primary route to market. We've got others, but it's our primary route to market.
And is that just your kind of route to market? Are we into distribution now rather than a model?
We're into distribution now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about this. And sorry, I just wanted to clarify. I'm just there's a lot of things going on, but I am following. So you're into distribution now. You originally built distribution first, and you've kind of come to decide that it's model first, then distribution, then product. So distribution, what is that? What does it look like? And how do you know once it's built? Is I suppose another question I have.
Well, I'm not sure distribution is ever really built, right? I think you scale it as you scale your business. But yeah, we have chosen very focused distribution channels, right? So LinkedIn is our channel, our primary channel. I mean, we generate business through email and referrals and a couple of other channels, but LinkedIn is our primary channel. We've developed a specific strategy around that. So you mentioned the transparency on LinkedIn. That is a strategy, right? So being very transparent on LinkedIn allows us to build our reputation, right? Allows us to show that we're making progress as an organization and we're somebody that our customers might want to work with. It allows us to build our network, right? So as we build our following, we naturally drive more business opportunity. I think it allows us to showcase our knowledge as well, right? So maybe not necessarily the revenue numbers, but any of the educational content that we're posting allows us to build our knowledge and build credibility that way as well. So distribution is something that we think about a lot. And, we think about how do we try and create those kind of high leverage distribution flywheels as well, or high distribution moments.
And is it, when you think about, and I'm going to refer back to my previous question as well, when you're thinking about distribution here, and you said that it's never really built, you first, the model, if you like, is this going to be conceptually, is this successful for us, right? And stop me now if I'm putting words in your mouth. Secondly, it's, are we going to be able to sell this, market it, and get it out to people in a kind of consistent manner, in a way that suits us and everything else? Is that kind of where we are from a model then distribution standpoint?
Pretty much, yeah.
And then to refer back to my last question, and you may have answered this, and I do apologize if I'm asking the same question again, but you chose LinkedIn, right, as a core way to do it. You said you do use email and everything, but I suppose it wasn't what you did with ChannelSight. It wasn't kind of where you would come from. How did that transition happen? How did you decide, okay, I think LinkedIn is going to be our distribution for these businesses?
I had a very good sales director when I was in LinkedIn, a guy called Paul Terry, and I remember him distinctly saying to me, be where your customers are, right? And that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but be where your customers are is why we chose LinkedIn, right? Our customers are on LinkedIn all day, every day. Salespeople are on LinkedIn. Sales execs are on LinkedIn. So that was why we chose LinkedIn. And then it was, once we've chosen the channel, it's about how do you commit to that channel, right? So we all post on LinkedIn. We have a process around how we post on LinkedIn. We have a process around how we create content on LinkedIn.
I wasn't sure if you were finished there, but are you finished?
I actually forgot what your initial question was.
Oh, sorry. So is basically why you decided to use LinkedIn rather than kind of outbound sales.
Yeah, pretty much. And don't get me wrong, we do outbound sales as well, right? We make cold calls, we send cold emails. We do a lot of the things that we train our customers to do. But we also follow the data as well, right? Like, our audience is growing, and we're generating a lot of our business through content and through cold outreach on LinkedIn. And again, just getting in, being in the place where our customers are engaging, right? So that's LinkedIn. We do a lot of lead gen dinners as well. So again, putting people physically in a room where they can have conversations. It's the same idea.
Well, so I'm in a business group, right? And within that group, I would say one of the biggest challenges that people would have currently is managing this whole content marketing side of things. Marketing has kind of changed. It's been happening for quite a while, but there's content is huge now, and just with the way that YouTube, for example, has developed and all of this kind of thing, content has become just a huge thing, and it's on a lot of people's minds. But I think something that I would struggle with, and something that a lot of other people would struggle with, is the strategy and the process around it, which you mentioned that you do have one. Could you talk me through, as much as you're comfortable, how you do it, how you kind of set up the strategy, and how you manage it and execute it kind of going forward? Because it's just a huge challenge for people, I find, and speaking personally.
Yeah, of course. So I think firstly we think about what are the content pillars that we write about, and we try and create consistency around that. So you've already mentioned the transparency piece. So how do we give our customers and our audience radical transparency in what is happening behind the scenes within our business, and in an unpolished way, right? I think people are kind of sick of the toxic positivity polished content that exists in a lot of social media. So that's one of our levers, right? Another is educational content. So we post about what a great discovery call looks like, right? A third one is social proof. We post about what our customers are experiencing, an example of those. Again, we try and do it in a raw, unpolished way. So those are three content pillars that we build our strategy on. Then we think about posting every day. Right now, if you're starting this out, that's a tough thing to do. So I'd encourage you to post 2 or 3 times a week. But we post every day and sometimes multiple times a day. We write content in batches. So we're not sitting down on LinkedIn and trying to be creative every single day. You work in blocks, you write 5, 10 posts at a time, and you schedule them to go out. And then you engage on that content, right? So you engage in the comments, you engage with the people that you want to engage on your own comments. A lot of it is not the creative process. A lot of it is being there in the moment when you're posting. It's the process of ensuring content goes out every day. Not every post is hugely insightful, but really what you're trying to do is make sure you're at the top of everybody's newsfeed when you need to be, right? So if someone thinks, hey, I need sales training today, we want to be top of mind because we're at the top of their newsfeed, and we've consistently built a brand around transparency, education, social proof, and whatever other pillars we're thinking about at that time.
What about resources? Have you looked at anything? Have you kind of learned any of this stuff anywhere, or is it kind of just something that you guys kind of came up with as you were going?
No, I definitely learned a lot from other people online, right? So, I mean, the first course that I bought was a guy called Justin Welch, who has a very large audience on LinkedIn and kind of wrote the playbook on how to create this stuff. I've taken a lot of influence from other very well-known creators like Alex and Layla Hormozy and Stephen Bartlett, and tried to adopt small elements of what they do into our own practices.
Has that been kind of reviewing their LinkedIn and seeing what they're putting out, or has it been kind of more formal?
No, it's the first. So reviewing their content and seeing what they're putting out, but probably trying to understand why different pieces of content are working and why others aren't, and how I can best replicate that, right? So, for example, you will often see content creators using established frameworks or hooks within their content, and that is because those hooks, hook is the first line in your post, is resonating with an audience, right? So some of my hooks are very close, if not exact matches of some of those well-known creators, or I follow a couple of copywriters as well, and then the content underneath will be my own content, and that is because the hook is the most important piece in your post. That's what gets people to click on see more and gets you to read the content. Content underneath needs to be good too, but the hook is the most important piece, right? And that is a piece that you can steal or learn from other creators who have bigger audiences and are better at this than we are.
Being in front of you here today, but also kind of looking at your LinkedIn posting and your content over time, I certainly get the impression that you're very secure on all this stuff, and you clearly have a depth of knowledge and a way to communicate it in a way, in a kind of polished manner, if you like. And I'm wondering, because everyone that comes in here, right, has had these moments of just, is this going to work? Like, what was I thinking? These kind of things. I'm wondering, has there been any of those moments for you over the kind of short period that you've been doing this?
I have more of those moments than I have ones where I'm totally sure of what we're doing. Yeah, 100%. I think there's a few things underneath that. One, that's a natural human reaction, right? Particularly when you're conceptualizing something in your head and then you're taking it to market. I think, I've learned a couple of things on this journey. One of them is, no matter what you take to market, you will be wrong. And what I mean by that is, you need to iterate on the first edition of whatever you build, because your customers will tell you, right? So if you retain that lens that you're probably going to be wrong, and therefore you need to default to action and get a read on it in terms of data, so that's customers, team members, that is a comforting thing, right? Because I can go to market and I can fail and fail and fail and fail and learn and learn and learn until I get it right. I think the second thing that's really benefited me in posting content every day is you realize, in the best way, how little people care. We are our own biggest critics. The number one thing that stops people posting content is, am I going to look stupid here? The reality is that people don't really remember your content, right? They might remember the odd post, but there are plenty of times that I've reposted content 2, 3, 4 times and nobody's ever said anything to me, right? The third thing is that every great entrepreneur that I look up to says that embarrassment is the price of entry, right? If you're going to build something great, you got to be embarrassed at the start. And, we have a long way to go to be as successful as some of the other entrepreneurs you've had on this pod, but I can certainly relate to the embarrassment at the point of entry, right? When we launched our online platform, for example, we had 3 to 6 months of people not showing up to training. Or what's actually worse, we had plenty of sessions where one person showed up, and then you got to explain why there's nobody else there. So I think my point there is, coming to a pod like this and talking about frameworks and great revenue numbers that we're posting online is the fun part. What people maybe don't see or don't remember are those things that you go through at the very start of building a business, and you kind of become numb to that, right? You kind of learn not to listen to the voice in your head that says, hey, this isn't going to work, don't do that. The self-questioning, the doubt. But yeah, I think, everybody has it, and I think sometimes that's actually can be what drives you.
It doesn't. I suppose, given that you've had those voices, it seems that you've managed to put them aside, certainly in your own mind. How difficult would you say that is? This kind of emotional balance and just, I suppose, personal management. How difficult is that side of this whole thing for you?
That's something I've become very passionate about. Again, we're launching another business in September, a business called The Arena, which is focused on helping community members to manage themselves and maximize their own potential. If I go back to last March, I was experiencing all of the challenges of running a business. And there's a great startup paradox that says sometimes when revenue is going up, cash is going down, right? Because you're spending more in order to try and drive further growth. And we were in the middle of that paradox. I found myself probably a little bit more reactive with the team than I wanted to be, and not quite as present, certainly not as clear in my decision making as I wanted to be. Probably taking a little bit of that home as well, although not wanting to admit it at the time. And what I did was I went and found a coach. So a guy called Jasper Walsh, who is now my co-founder in The Arena, and he and I worked on those things that you've touched on there, right? So firstly, what do I do in terms of mental tools and mental performance that allow me to stay grounded in my decision making and be present both in work and home? In some cases, that was actually more physical things that led to better mental performance. So exercise, for example, getting back into rigorous exercise. I'm a big fan of cold exposure, so I love my ice baths. And again, that just kind of really allows me to stay grounded. And then sometimes it was things that I didn't initially have within my toolkit. So, really trying to think about micro moments. So, my walk to work is something that I do without music in my ears on purpose, because I think about the day ahead and how I want to show up to work. And then similarly, coming home in the evening, that point of putting your hand on the door handle as you come in the door, that's your exit from work into your home life, and really trying to think about how do you show up and be present at home. So, there's lots of other things we worked on within that, but that is something that I have tried to prioritize and try to really invest in, because it allows me to be more productive when I'm in work.
Did you always want to be an entrepreneur? Did you always want to start your own business?
No. I actually admire a lot of or in some ways I wish I had the story of being 4 years old and going door to door selling things. I don't have that story. I do have the story of, wanting to work hard and always wanting to be successful, right? So I can take that back to my early sales days doing door to door and working in LinkedIn. But I think what I have figured out over the trajectory of the last few years is that growing a business and building a business is what I am passionate about. But that was through being exposed to a startup and scale up environment within ChannelSight, not because I knew I wanted it up front.
What about sales? Because you started in sales relatively early, and door to door sales, you started doing it, and you kind of. And, I've read books of entrepreneurs that have started out that way, and they've, and they're just going through, so I realized, it didn't matter how many doors I got slammed in my face, I just needed one, and I just needed to get used to people saying no. Whereas I just know a lot of people would never have started that job, or they may have started and said, I'm not doing this again, after the first day, but something kind of helped you stick with it. Was it something, did you sort of know? You said you weren't that passionate about sales and you want to, and that's how you ended up kind of in training. But there must have been something that kind of resonated with you a little bit as you kind of started doing sales.
I think it was trying to incrementally build my skill set. I think it was trying to move fast all the time. So it was, the door-to-door selling. It was, doing that entry-level role in LinkedIn for 9 months and wanting to move on to the next level. It was doing a year selling in LinkedIn and wanting to go into a startup. So there is a history there of trying to look for the next thing and move on to the next bigger challenge when I was starting to feel comfortable in my existing role. So I think that's one thing. I'm a big believer in working really hard, and that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but there's definitely a culture out there at the moment of work-life balance, and I want to be careful in my message there because I've just talked a lot about some of the things that I do in order to keep myself grounded. But I'm a big believer, particularly as you are building a business, that you have to work unreasonably hard for a long period of time. And I think that has probably stood me in good stead over the course of years as well.
What does that look like? Is it long hours? Is it mind share? What's hard work look like?
Yeah, it's long hours for sure. And again, posting content on LinkedIn and talking about client success is great. That's the fun stuff. But behind the scenes, it's trying to fix the CRM or doing the first iteration of our branding or putting a training program together or stepping in for a facilitator who's sick. It's the non-fun stuff. It's spending time in spreadsheets. It's talking to other entrepreneurs about what's working and what's not working. So I think that's a lot of the stuff that people don't see. And I think, it can be exciting and look exciting to talk about building and growing your own business. And it is, don't get me wrong. But there's a lot of non-sexy stuff that goes on behind the scenes as well.
Why do it? Because, and some of the stuff you mentioned there, these things are difficult, and it's actually what everyone says. When you're talking to people, it sometimes gets the better of people, and it sometimes kind of drives people on. For you, how do you kind of battle with it with this stuff?
I think I've a clear understanding of what I want 5 years time to look like in 10 years, and all those little things that you're doing now and all those extra hours that you're putting in are a building block for something bigger, right? So I think that's some of it. Some of it is the freedom and flexibility that I have. And, although it's long hours, I'm also very grateful for the fact that I set my own agenda, right? And I set my own schedule. And that is something that I think I'll probably never be able to give up at this stage as well. So probably why the term work-life balance just doesn't quite fit, or maybe it's something that is unique to every person, your own version of work-life balance.
Here's something I'm really interested in, and you kind of mentioned it there, which is why I want to kind of focus on it. So you've a good ideas to what 5 or 10 years, what you want at that stage. And it's very far out, right, to think. Even 5 years is very far out to think, and to even plan for, it's very difficult to do it. How do you think about that? Well, maybe first and foremost, if you're comfortable to share, what are the kind of things you're looking for over that time frame, and then how you work towards them?
Sure. So professionally speaking, I've mentioned 2 other businesses briefly that we're building. So we have Lennox, which is sales training for sales leaders. We're launching the Arena in September, which is a community for sales leaders. And then we're building OverPath, which is technology for sales leaders. So the vision for 5, 10 years down the road is to build a network of businesses around the same buyer. And that is something that I've stumbled into and become obsessed with over the last 12 months. And so everything that we're doing now, Lennox is in a good place and is growing. The Arena and OverPath were right back at ground zero again, right? The Arena first event is in early September. OverPath, we're going to be raising money in Q4. So we are back at scrappy ground zero, figuring out exactly what our messaging looks like, what our go-to-market is going to look like, what the model is going to look like around it, all that good stuff. But for me, it's an understanding that what we're doing now is going to lead to those sister businesses in 5 years' time that serve the same buyer, and allow me to think about scaling organizations, plural businesses, rather than scaling Lennox, which is where I know I want to be in 5 or 10 years' time. So that's the vision. I also said to you a few minutes ago that, you know, the thing that you go to market with inevitably ends up being something different. So we can look back on this in a couple of years' time and see, you know, whether we were able to execute on that vision.
Why start the new businesses? You said there you kind of become obsessed with this idea of kind of having multiple businesses with the same buyer, but why, I suppose?
Well, some of it is because I believe that we can build businesses that drive each other, right? So already, even as we've started to have conversations for OverPath in the arena, we've started to create this flywheel where, you know, Lennox customers are looking at the other two businesses, and new customers or new prospects that we're talking to about the other two businesses are starting to become interested in Lennox, right? And that is exactly the relationship between the businesses that I'm trying to create. So that's the main reason, is that I can see growth levers for one business in the other businesses. I suppose, you know, if I'm to look introspectively, it probably also serves my enjoyment is the right word, but my passion in getting businesses off the ground. I think what I'm learning is that the 0 to 1 and for the 1 to 10 phase, you know, is really where I love building. And already within Lennox, you know, I'm starting to think about the things that have got us here are not the things that are going to get us to 10, right? I'm trying to remove myself from some of those processes and some of that structure. And maybe the arena and the OverPath piece is kind of taking me back to that real phase that I'm passionate about.
Talk to me about money. So if I kind of look at your LinkedIn content, it would seem that you're making money now, which is great. You know, it's good, making quite a bit of it. How important is that? And I suppose now that you're making a bit of money, feel free to tell me if you're not, but does that feel good?
I'll tell you when I start making it. Again, I think one of the misconceptions that one of the things that people look at it and kind of think and maybe isn't true is, you know, when you post revenue numbers, 6-figure revenue numbers like I'm starting to post, is that you're making lots of money. And unfortunately, that's just not the case, right? Now, obviously, we're in this game for a longer term play. And financial freedom is absolutely the personal goal. But, you know, at this stage of growth, we're 2.5 years into the business. I mentioned we're a bootstrapped business that thinks very carefully about cash. I'm not making lots of money. I'm certainly making 40% of what I was making when I was in full-time employment, right? And so that's not the game right now. I think that's probably another thing that you got to be cognizant of if you're thinking about entrepreneurship as your craft, right? Is there's a long period of time where you forego the earnings that you would have made in full-time employment. So I'll answer that question hopefully in a few years' time when I start making real money.
Yeah, because it is interesting, and I suppose and part of your LinkedIn strategy, as you said, and the content strategy is you're giving a raw side of yourself, and, you know, maybe not the everything is rosy picture that is comes across so often now on social media. But it's still easy to kind of look at it maybe and think, wow, like this is, you know, he's making bank. Why isn't he on a beach somewhere? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is another important point in there that I do think it's also important that you pay yourself enough as a founder, right? I've had conversations with first-time founders who say, I'm going to pay myself almost nothing in order to reinvest everything back into the business. And that's not the way either. Right. As soon as you're able to pay yourself a salary to live a comfortable life, that is what you should do. Right. And then think about reinvesting everything else into the business. But yeah, for sure. You know, cash flow is a strange thing. Cash flow behaves very differently to revenue in every organization, but particularly in startups and particularly in services businesses, right? It's only a portion of our revenue is subscription revenue. So that means that cash discipline, we've had to develop models around that and really think about careful execution. That means that, yeah, we're not paying ourselves what we would be paying ourselves if we were working in large organizations.
So what does the future hold for the Lennox Academy, for the other businesses? What does the kind of next year or two look like for you?
Well, I'm really as excited as I've ever been about Lennox at the moment. It feels like we're really starting to find our groove. We're starting to deliver global training programs. In the last 6 months, we've started to win programs against the biggest players in our industry. There's a couple of players out there who are, US based and are doing, they're very large organizations that are doing much bigger numbers than us, and we've started to win some deals there. So that's very, very validating in terms of our own trajectory. It gives us a new element of social proof, and it gives us a product that again has leveled up a lot in the last 3 or 6 months. So I think the future is very bright over the next year, 2 years, as we really step into those that product and those new offerings that we have. Elsewhere, I found it hard to sit on the sidelines and watch as the AI revolution happens. So OverPath is my big swing from an AI perspective. So, plan, as I said, is to raise money in Q4 and really drive growth through that business next year. And the arena, I think, is something that our industry is crying out for, right? And the more conversations that I have with sales leaders, the more I hear about the stresses and the pressures that exist in their organizations, exactly as I've experienced. So I'm really excited to bring that to market over the next couple of weeks, but really over the next 12 and 15 months as well. So I hope that we're sitting here again in a few years' time and there are 3 thriving businesses, serving the same buyer, but, serving them with very different offerings.
Ross Keating, it's been a pleasure talking to you this morning. Where can people find out more about you, and what are next steps for anyone who wants to get in touch?
Yes, the best place is LinkedIn. You'll find me on LinkedIn if I haven't found you already through content, or you can find us on our website, thelennoxacademy.com.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.